Good evening, everybody. My name is Mark Baltzell. I'm the statewide salmon and steelhead manager for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'd like to welcome you to our North of Falcon meeting, focusing on Puget Sound wreck fisheries and Puget Sound freshwater fisheries. Up on the screen here for you, we have some Zoom meeting, call logistics, ground rules to go through just real quickly. We're going to run through the presentation after that and we'll get started. So you can turn on your camera, mute and unmute yourself through the control panel at the bottom of your screen. We're going to keep folks muted during the program, and our friend Leah will help unmute you when it's your turn to speak. Callers can unmute yourself by pressing *6 on your phone. We also ask that you do use the raise hand feature, which you can access through the control panel, or if you're on the phone, you can hit *9. We're not necessarily going to be monitoring the chat tonight. You're welcome to put stuff in there, but we will likely not answer questions out of the chat tonight. When you are here tonight, make sure that you mute your phone line when you're not speaking, if you're not already muted. Be tough on issues and questions, but not on people or organizations. Please, no personal attacks, insults, or threats. We as a staff in the department are here to listen to you, and we're hopeful for a nice, healthy, and respectful conversation and exchange tonight. And just so everybody's awareness, this meeting is being recorded and will be accessible on our website after tonight. Next slide, please, Kirsten. So before we get started, I guess I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that there is all of tonight's meeting materials are on our website. We are going to post a link in the chat that folks can click on. All of the modeling, proposed seasons, and all of the presentation is on the website as well. So just wanted to make folks aware of that. Also, I know there's been a lot of chatter out there in social media that this is a done deal. It's not a done deal. We're about halfway through the process. We have lots of time to make changes and consider changes. So just wanted to put that out there before we got started. Next slide, please. So tonight we're going to go just a quick jump through the forecast review. We're going to go through the Chinook and Coho management objectives, talk about the current season proposals for Puget Sound and freshwater, talk about some of the things that we're considering this year through our management, and then mostly the bulk of our time tonight will be to take public comment. Next slide. So for those of you who are new to this process or wonder what North of Falcon is the annual cooperative process to set salmon seasons in Washington. The name refers to the waters north of Oregon's Cape Falcon, which marks the southern border of Washington's management area for salmon stocks. North of Falcon is one component of a larger salmon season setting process that involves Washington, tribal governments, federal regulators, and other states and Canada. North of Falcon is also part of a larger rulemaking process that happens under the Administrative Procedures Act. Back in January, we filed a CR 101, which opens up our rules for rule changes. In the middle here, in this in this time period, we're doing the North of Falcon process where we're crafting seasons. Those will end up being part of a CR 102 filing, which is the rule package for this year's fisheries. Sometime in May, we will publish those and be taking comment. We'll have a public hearing in June, and then hopefully the director signs off on that rules package in the latter part of June. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Kirsten Simonson. She's our recreational fisheries manager for salmon in Puget Sound. Kirsten?
Thanks, Mark. So for those of you who have been attending public meetings for the last couple weeks or so, some of these next couple of slides are going to be a bit of a review, but just want to make sure that everybody has the information on hand as we go through everything. So I'm just going to do a really quick forecast recap. So you can see here, Puget Sound Chinook, the natural stocks are down about 36% and the hatchery stocks are up about 6% from the most recent 10-year average. For Puget Sound Coho, the natural stocks are up about 29% and the hatchery stocks are up about 61% from the most recent 10-year average. I will point out that that 10-year average includes the Coho crash year of 2015 and also subsequent years in 2016 and 17 of poor ocean conditions. So what we're seeing in these increases is a rebound from those poor conditions in that time period from 2015 to about 2017. So starting to see some rebound there. For Puget Sound chum, the natural stocks are down about 61% and the hatchery stocks are down about 64% from the 10-year average. So looking at some specific basin by basin numbers, this is a comparison between the current year and last year's forecasts. And so you can see here for the Puget Sound Chinook for the summer and fall stocks, we're up about 7% from last year. You can see the particular areas that are coded in green are a more than 25% increase. And if they're coded in red, it's a more than 25% decrease from last year, just to kind of orient you to what's happening here. So here is the Puget Sound spring stocks, and these are natural. Sorry, the last slide and this slide are natural stocks. You can see that the natural spring stocks are up about 28% overall from last year. So if we look at the hatchery numbers for summer fall stocks, you can see overall we're up about 8% from last year. And for the spring stocks, pretty much dead even with last year. Moving on to coho, for the natural coho, you can see the comparisons between this year and last year, up about 9%. You can kind of see there's a little bit of a mixed bag between green and red here. I'll point out the couple areas of concern are mostly in the South Sound. You can see Puyallup, the Deschutes and Hood Canal are all depressed this year. And looking at coho hatchery stocks, up about 8% as compared to last year. And you can see the two spots of red there are the Stillaguamish and the Snohomish, which are definitely going to come up again in conversation later on. So these are the most recent coho management objectives for this year for Puget Sound, or sorry, Chinook management objectives for Puget Sound for this year. I won't go through everything in gory detail. Most of this has been covered in better detail by Derek and during other meetings, but I just will point out that the ones that are highlighted here in orange, we're still not meeting those management objectives in the current round of modeling. So these are things to consider as we're moving forward for Chinook. We look at coho, you can kind of just see some of the things that pop out here that I'll point out. The Strait of Juan de Fuca stocks are still under a rebuilding plan they've not met that rebuilding plan yet. So those stocks are still depressed. Hood Canal coho are currently in an overfished status as of the most recent PFMC reports. And also point out that the Snohomish are under a rebuilding plan and are managed to a minimum escapement target of 55,000. So we're still under that rebuilding plan as of this year. So now moving into some of the proposed seasons, a couple things I want to point out here is that this information is available on the website, and the most recent model runs for Chinook are available on the website as well. I'll point out that this is the same proposed season matrix that was presented last week. The matrix has not changed, but obviously there's a lot of things that we're going to discuss and talk about tonight. So I just want to point out that this is the same one that's on our website and that was presented last week as well. So we can just look at some of the changes that have occurred for this year that I'll point out. In areas 5 and 6, no big changes. In area 7, this will be moving to an August 15th start, and we have that February winter fishery built in. Area 9 is moving to an August 1 start through September 30th. Area 10, the winter Chinook fishery will be in February only. Area 11 is moving to a June 1 start. And areas 12 and 13, there's no major changes, but there are some changes for coho, so this will pop up for non-retention for Chinook later on. I will, again, just to remind you that these model runs are now available on the website. So moving to the coho proposed seasons, you can take a look here, and I will say that these model runs are not available on the website currently. We were still under negotiations with co-managers to finalize the model runs. As far as I know, that has been, the model inputs have been finalized and the model runs are happening tonight, which means that those model comparisons should be available by tomorrow. So looking at some of the changes in the coho fishery for this year, again, the modeling is not 100% finalized, but we should have more information up on the website tomorrow. And then all that will be presented on Wednesday during the public north of Falcon. So for areas in 5 and 6, no major change. Area 7, again, that August 15th start through the end of September, and this would be a mark selective fishery for coho. Area 9, the August 1 start date. Area 10, no big changes. Area 11, a June 1 start. For Area 12, south of Ayoc, there's no changes. For Quilcene Bay, it will open August 1st. And for north of Ayoc, it would open September 1st. And Area 13, no big changes. So moving into the freshwater seasons, I've kind of broken this out by kind of some of the North Sound, Central Sound, and South Sound basins, just to kind of orient and keep it a little bit more organized for me. So in the Nooksack, there's a potential to have a spring Chinook season. For Coho, it'll be the same as last year. In the Snohomish River, there's a couple of suggestions that have been made to deal with anti-snagging. And so those rules are kind of proposed, I have them posted here. In the Skagit, there's a hatchery spring and Coho are similar to 2021. For Sockeye, there are both lake and river opportunities proposed. There's also additional river reach proposed from Gilligan to the Dalles. And in general, expect day and area closures in the Skagit to avoid conflict with treaty fisheries. Moving down to Central Sound, the Stillaguamish are similar seasons proposed to 2021. In the Snohomish, the current proposal is in the Skykomish River for a Chinook mark selective fishery, and in the Wallace River for a Coho mark selective fishery. Keep in mind that the Stillaguamish and the Snohomish are going to be two of our big stocks of concern this year for both Chinook and Coho. So, well, Chinook for both of them and Snohomish Coho. So just something to keep in mind as we move forward. In the Lake Washington area, similar seasons to 2021. In the Green and Duwamish system, similar to 2021. And again, there'll be a Chinook 2 fish daily limit in that river system. Moving down to South Sound, the Puyallup and the Carbon Rivers, similar seasons relative to 2021. There will be a reduced weekly fishing schedule. And again, I mentioned these rivers earlier, specifically the Puyallup is a concern for Coho this year. So there's some potential to investigate the possibility of a mark selective fishery. This has not been discussed with co-managers yet, so but it's just something that we've kind of have looked at. In the Nisqually, similar seasons to 2021 are proposed. The Skokomish is closed until further notice, and the Dungeness is going to have a mark selective Coho fishery proposed for October. In the Hood Canal, this was presented last week as well. Oh, Mark Downen jumped on, so I'll just let him take over here for a second. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I don't do nearly as good of a job at this as Dr. Simonson, but I am here to give you a quick rundown on where we are with freshwater opportunities in the canal. We're looking fairly similar to last year and the last few years, as a matter of fact. We've got a Coho fishery on the Big Quilcene River, which goes from August 16th through the end of October, and that's a 4-fish limit with an anti-snagging rule. We have had some fisheries conflicts with tribal and non-treaty fisheries at the Rogers Street access, and we are having some discussions with our co-managers about the possibility of either alternating days or moving the non-treaty closure slightly upstream so that there's a little bit of separation between those fisheries. We have a couple of chum fisheries. These are fall chum fisheries on the Dosey Wallops and Duckabush River. They operate from the 1st of November through the first half of December, limit of 2. And as Dr. Simonson already mentioned, the Skokomish River, both Chinook and Coho are closed due to the ongoing reservation boundary dispute. There are a couple of other small fisheries, the Tahuya and the Duwato River, where we've had Coho fisheries historically, and I have seen these rivers mentioned in public comments, so I wanted to address those. The Tahuya River has a private property issue. There was some pretty excessive abuse on private property there at the access point that led us no alternative but to close that fishery. And in the Duwato River, we have a struggling summer chum population where we have fishing occurring right on top of summer chum redds and a lot of impacts to those redds. So we've had those fisheries closed for the last couple of years. And the fact that the Coho stock is in overfish status, and we have a very low forecast for the canal, very near the critical break point, those Coho fisheries are likely to stay closed for 2022. And that's what I have. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mark. Appreciate it. You can definitely do the Hood Canal more justice than I can, so appreciate that you jumping in there. So just to kind of wrap up some of the considerations that we have moving into this season. So the forecast for Puget Sound, Chinook, and Coho stocks are modestly improved over recent years. However, obviously there are still some areas of concern. Chinook stocks continue to be depressed relative to their status at listing and designated as in crisis in the most recent State of the Salmon report from 2020. Low expected returns of natural Chinook to Stillaguamish and the Snohomish rivers are going to continue to be a concern. Low expected returns of natural coho in the Strait of the South Sound, the Hood Canal, and the Strait of Juan de Fuca stocks are also going to continue to be a concern. There is potential to have both the Queets and the Snohomish stocks each be rebuilt by the end of this year, so that's kind of a big bright spot for us. And then chum stocks returning to the South Sound and Hood Canal are similar to 2021, and obviously there's still continued concerns over southern resident killer whales. So just like to finish with the upcoming meeting schedule. Obviously today we have the Puget Sound recreational fisheries discussion happening right now. So you're all here. North of Falcon 2 is coming up this week. Starting tomorrow, we have meetings with the co-managers. And then on Wednesday, the 30th, there'll be North of Falcon number 2 public meeting that begins at 9 a.m. The link for that meeting is on our website. And I believe you have to pre-register for that one as well. So just make sure you go check that out. Other upcoming things to note, April 1st, Columbia River and Ocean Fisheries discussion. April 5th, Awillapa Bay Fisheries discussion. April 6th, the Grays Harbor Fishery discussion. And this all wraps up with the final Pacific Fisheries Management Council meeting happening the second week of April. And with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. And if anybody else on the line from our end has anything else that they wanted to add to anything that I said, please feel free to do so now. Otherwise, we'll just go ahead and open it up to questions.
So Kirsten, I wasn't sure if we were going to go to Dr. Dapp to run through any of the materials about the modeling before we open it up for questions. Sorry, Derek, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I just thought it might be helpful. Again, as I said early in the meeting, we did post all of the meeting materials tonight on the website. Along with those meeting materials is a tool that Dr. Dapp developed that helps people understand different fisheries proposals and how that relates to the modeling that we're trying to do for Chinook. So what hopefully I didn't put Derek too much on the spot. I would like him to maybe run through some of the modeling that we're looking at, how that relates to Chinook seasons, and then we're going to jump right into hearing your comments and thoughts about the proposed seasons. So Derek, if that works for you, let's roll forward.
Thanks for that, Mark. And just to introduce myself, I see a lot of new faces on the line here. I'm Derek Dapp. I'm one of our modelers here at DFW, and I work alongside an excellent modeling team. I see some of those my colleagues online: Angelika Hagenbrow, Dan Auerbach, and Jeremiah Schrobnell. Just saying hi to everybody. As we're getting started up, also recognizing that we've got a few new faces online, I'll try to do a little bit more explaining than I normally would about kind of how some of our management objectives work, what an exploitation rate is, what's an escapement goal, et cetera, as I'm going through the modeling. I think that kind of as Kirsten highlighted, we don't have an updated Coho model from our meeting that was about 2 weeks ago now. So I do briefly want to go through that Coho model, but most of the presentation that I do tonight is going to be more focused on Chinook and our outputs from that model. Maybe to start us off on Coho, I'll just describe what we've got in the modeling currently. So in the Coho model currently, our last set of official runs includes updates for 2022 ocean fisheries, 2022 abundance, and 2022 northern fisheries. What hasn't been updated yet in those Coho models is the 2022 Puget Sound fishery inputs. Those are still represented by 2021 fisheries, so the final fisheries from last year. And I will pull that on screen in just a second, some of those Coho results. Hopefully everybody can see this coming up on screen now.
Derek, I would say just blow it up a little bit.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So to describe how our management objectives work, There's often two things that we're paying attention to. One being the exploitation rate of a stock, and there's different metrics that I'll go into in just a moment on that. But an exploitation rate represents the percentage of the adult stock being taken by fisheries. And there's different groupings there. Sometimes we look at what we call a southern US exploitation rate, which is just those fisheries that are occurring south of Canada, i.e. any that are occurring in Washington and Oregon and California. Sometimes we're looking at what we call a total exploitation rate, which would include all fisheries along the West Coast. And there's other metrics as well. There's one that's just for some stocks, we just look at a pre-terminal southern United States exploitation rate, and that would represent just those fisheries that are occurring in the marine area in the southern US. Another metric that we often pay attention to for stocks is escapement. So escapement is the number of fish in a particular stock that are making it back to any individual river, and then going on to spawn. And so kind of as we're looking at our management objectives for these stocks, you can see that some of these objectives over here are based on different escapement metrics. Some are based on exploitation rate metrics. And so as we're going through, just highlighting kind of some of the key coho stocks of concern that we might want to be paying attention to as we move into our modeling that incorporates Puget Sound inputs. So first highlighting Fraser River, particularly the Thompson stock. That stock has a management objective of 10% United States ER. And we can see across our range of ocean options, which I guess I should describe in just 1 second. I will get to that. But across our range of ocean options, we see a range of exploitation rates there of 7.8% to 9.7%. So pretty close to that 10% US exploitation rate. I should mention that right now in the modeling process, we are using kind of 3 sets of model runs, and those 3 sets of model runs represent different alternatives for what types of ocean fisheries we put into the model run. So as far as coho goes, you can see what that range of alternatives here is. Basically, this represents kind of a quota that's in our ocean fisheries, ranging from kind of a low ocean option for the non-treaty fleet of 160,000 coho, all the way up to a high ocean option of 210,000 coho. So that's why you see these ERs, these exploitation rates fluctuating depending on the ocean option that you're examining. Aside from the Fraser River, the Thompson stock, other stocks that we should be paying attention to as we're getting our first sets of coho model runs would be over here, the Strait of Juan de Fuca stock that is in overfish status and also has a 10% southern US exploitation rate objective. You can see across our range of options, we're getting a little bit close to that, and we want to kind of monitor that as we start to put in inputs for 2022. Similarly, for the Hood Canal natural stock, we have a 45% total exploitation rate objective, and we have currently our ocean options exploitation rate is ranging between 43.5 and 44.7%. There will be a period later where we can take some questions on coho, but for right now, I think I'll move us on to Chinook, where we might be focusing a little bit more tonight. So for Chinook, the modeling is at a little bit different place than the coho. So for Chinook, where we're at is we've got updated 2022 abundances in the model, as well as 2022 fisheries for all fisheries along the West Coast, with the exception of there's still a few Canadian fisheries that are outstanding. Those would be the West Coast Vancouver Island troll and sport, as well as the Northern British Columbia troll and sport. Both of those sets of fisheries will get updated a little bit later in the process, probably in about probably just in a few days here, I would say, actually. So be paying attention to that one. The other piece that we're missing is some of the Canadian and Oregon stock abundances. The forecasts should also be coming in kind of in a few days here. So those are the 2 pieces that haven't been updated. But the difference that you'll notice in this set of model runs relative to the set of model runs that was presented 2 weeks ago is now these model runs have been updated to include 2022 proposed fisheries within Puget Sound. And we can see that, that it makes quite a difference on some of these exploitation rates, just to highlight some of the stocks that are currently not meeting their objectives for Chinook in these initial model runs. So maybe just to highlight over here in these columns B and C, these are our management objectives for this year. So for example, if we're looking at Nooksack Springs, we see that we have an exploitation rate ceiling of 10.9%, and that represents a southern US management objective. As we look across the range of ocean option runs, right now I'm highlighting the high ocean option, which represents a quota of 65,000 non-treaty in the ocean and 50,000 treaty. The middle ocean option, 60,000 non-treaty and 40,000 treaty. Then the low ocean option, 53,000 non-treaty and 30,000 treaty. So across this range of ocean options, you can see highlighted here in the orange, that is our southern US management, that is our southern US exploitation rate outputs from each of those model runs. And you can see in all three ocean options, we're exceeding that 10.9%. As we're kind of going through some of the other stocks, just to highlight on Skagit Summer Falls, we currently have a 15% SUS management objective, and we can see that our SUS exploitation rate is coming out between 18.7 and 19.2%. I'll get back to Stillaguamish and Snohomish in just a second, but maybe just quickly to highlight some of the other stocks. Lake Washington, Green River, Puyallup, those are all managed to a 15% pre-terminal SUS management objective. In our highest ocean option, we're currently exceeding that objective. Looking at Nisqually, Nisqually has a 47% total exploitation rate objective, and we're exceeding in all three ocean options between 48.4 and 50.3%. One other stock to highlight would be Snohomish, which has a 50% total exploitation rate objective. And currently in our model runs, the total exploitation rate is coming out anywhere between 53.8 and 55.6%. Moving back up to Stillaguamish, Stillaguamish has been one of our most constraining stocks in recent years, particularly to sport fisheries. We can see that this year we have a 9% unmarked SUS management objective, as well as a 14% marked SUS management objective. We'll definitely do a little bit of exploration of Stillaguamish in just a few minutes here. But currently in our sets of model runs, our unmarked SUS exploitation rate is ranging between 13.8% all the way up to 14.3%. And similarly, the marked SUS management objective is anywhere between 18 and 18.5%. Snohomish, Snohomish is in a little bit of an interesting category this year. We're currently below what we call our lower bound abundance threshold, and that's particularly for the Skycomish subpopulation of the stock. When we fall below that lower bound threshold, we discuss the allowable impacts that the Southern United States fisheries could have for that stock, given the poor abundance status. We'll talk about that a little bit more later too, but that's definitely a stock that we're going to want to be paying attention to as we're crafting our fisheries. So if I could, I might pull up a modeling tool that some folks might be familiar with that we've used in kind of recent public meetings and in past years. So give me just 1 second to share a new screen here. Folks, some folks who have been to some of our past meetings might be familiar with this, but maybe just to explain for any new folks that we might have online. As we're kind of doing season crafting, we run through various scenarios of fisheries packages in each area and time period. And this is one of the tools that we use to do that. So in this tool right here, what we have in this first column, column A, we have for each area and time period, we have a range of different options with which we can choose. And these options all deviate from what we've currently got in the model. It has a little description about kind of how the quota changes for that option and how the season changes for that option. And if we wanted to signify taking one of those options, we could do so by putting an X in one of these boxes. And I will get into what that does in just a second. But as we're going through, you can see that we're kind of focused on today's meeting on marine areas 5 through 10. In those marine areas, those are primarily the ones that impact Stillaguamish and Snohomish, two of the stocks that we're paying the most attention to this year. But as we go through our modeling exercises, we're going to be looking at a few other stocks as well Nisqually and Snohomish to be specific. Anyway, coming out of that first set of model runs, we have up here in this section that I'm highlighting at the moment, these are from our middle ocean option. These are the current outputs of the model run. So you can see over here, for example, we have for Stillaguamish, we have an unmarked SUS exploitation rate of 14.1%. And just in this row below, in row number 7, we have kind of what the management objective is, what the goal to get to is. And so if we were to put X's in each of these boxes, we could examine how those scenarios affect each of our management objectives. For example, where we've placed this X in this very first box, you can see that it increases the Stillaguamish unmarked SUS exploitation rate by 0.4%. And you can see how it changes the total mortalities. Now, as we're going through this modeling exercise, you might notice that we're quite far off our management objectives on some of these. But what I would urge people to consider is that to really be looking at Stillaguamish, and particularly at this number of non-treaty mortalities in this column over here. The objective by the end of the process is we expect that to the non-treaty fleet, there will be somewhere between 67 and 70 Stillaguamish mortalities kind of at the end of the process. So if you look at where we're at currently at about 77 mortalities, we do have a little bit of a ways to go to get down to where we will need to be at the end of the process. There will need to be some reductions there. As we continue to think about season shaping, once again, 3 stocks that I think that we should be paying attention to and seeing how any changes that we make might affect their exploitation rates. Snohomish, Snohomish right here, due to its poor abundance category, is one where we're going to want to see how any actions that we propose affect that exploitation rate. Nisqually is one where a little bit above our management objective currently, and we're going to want to be paying attention to that one. And then Snohomish as well is also above by a little bit. So as we're kind of focusing our shaping for Stillaguamish and getting into this range of 67 to 70 Chinook mortalities, how does it affect those other stocks in the model? Another metric that might be important to look at as we're going through this process is looking at the total marine Puget Sound sport catch, and that's over here in this column to the far right in column I. One thing that we want to monitor is any season shaping that we do has potential to either increase or decrease our total Puget Sound sport catch. And so as we're taking actions, we might want to be considering how that metric changes as well. So this tool is available online, and I'm going to ask one of my colleagues, maybe either Mark or Kirsten, if you could just put a link in the chat to folks that might be interested in looking at this modeling tool. I could walk through some scenarios here, some of the different things that we've been considering, but perhaps maybe, and I'll look to Mark to just get the head nod to see if this is okay. Maybe now is a really good time to take a little bit of a pause and see if everybody's kind of understanding where we're at in the process, see if there are any questions. I'll pause there.
No, I think this is a great time to pause and take questions and comments. We have a number of regional staff on the line that can also answer questions about any of the river systems that we talked about. So we're going to have our friend Leah moderate the speakers tonight. So she'll ask you to unmute, and we'll do our best to answer your questions and take your comments. So with that, Leah, the floor is yours.
Okay, and it looks like our first hand up is Alex. Alex, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us. I just want to look at something here. So on the March 4th meeting that we attended, the meeting materials and the NOF meeting schedule, it did not have tonight's meeting listed. And if you look back again on the March 16th meeting that we attended, the NOF schedule on there did not have this meeting listed. And this meeting wasn't listed until yesterday about noon on your website, which was after the fact that it was uploaded onto your Facebook. What was the department's reasoning for such an abrupt scheduled meeting? Thank you.
So, Alex, it was not abruptly scheduled. I believe it was on the website in January or February. It may have been in a different spot than you were
Mark, that's
looking.
not true. That's not true, Mark. It
Okay,
wasn't on the
well,
website.
we're not here to
yesterday.
talk about whether or not a meeting
I
was on the
just wanna know
website.
what the
We're here
fact-
to take public comments on seasons.
I want to know why.
We're going to
The
move on,
meeting was
Alex.
posted on the website, and on top of that, the meeting was put in that the last slide I've presented at every single meeting since the 4th. It's been on that as well.
We're here to talk about fisheries proposals, not
totally
about
agree,
whether or
Mark.
not there was
I agree.
meetings on the website. Next one, Leah.
And our next hand is from Zachary. Zachary, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
Hi, you guys. Can you hear me okay?
Gotcha, Zachary. Go ahead.
Awesome. So I'm going to sort of build on a couple of things I talked about in the past, sort of building up with looking at these suggested fisheries. And then I have one sort of question off of that, and I'd love to sort of just pitch an idea I have and go through there. So as I said before, our objectives tend to be days on the water, then sort of maximizing fish harvested within an equitable distribution around the various marine areas and the different populations that live in those areas. So with that, it sort of seems like the worst possible option that we run into some of these times are closures due to shakers, because that's a situation where our days on the water get reduced, or potentially our days open to retention for species get reduced, and we don't get to harvest our fish. And I'm extremely concerned that with the Marine Area 9 shifting to be starting on August 1st instead of July 16th, with all of that effort shift going to Marine Area 10. Last year went over, even with Marine Area 9 being open, the shaker encounters went way over. And with everyone fish that would have been fishing Marine Area 9, fishing Marine Area 10, when there aren't as many adult fish in Marine Area 10, how has the shaker quota been adjusted to account for that effort shift and prevent the shakers from being the cause of the closure?
So folks on the line may know that we have some pretty robust sampling and monitoring programs. We've had them in place for a long time. A lot of that information goes into the modeling that we do, and you can pop your camera back on, Derek, because I was going to hand it to you. But Derek can get into exactly how we do that, but we do use that information that we collect in our fisheries to inform the modeling that we do in future years and subsequent years.
Okay, so if that's in there, then that's good. I mean, I've talked to Derek before. I know he puts these things in, but I just want to make sure we're not setting ourselves up for a situation where shakers are going to be the cause for a closure, because that sort of is the worst scenario. So with that said, and sort of, partially addressing, I'd love if I sort of have a, suggestion based on the tool, and I'd love if maybe Derek could, put the X's in while I say this out, just maybe to help folks visualize. Would that be something we could do?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so sort of keeping in line with, what I said earlier about days on the water, if we switch the Marine Area 7 summer to being Coho directed instead of in Chinook non-retention, with that starting that same period, August 16th to September 30th. I know this is a big deal to have no Chinook in Marine Area 7 summer, but for the sake of considering, let's just go with this. That saves us 23 of the total mortalities. It also saves us significant of the unmarked mortalities for both categories, while not reducing our days on the water. That allows us to then add the Marine Area 9 summer for the second half of July, so that top option. That also allows us to, if we just go down, correct the modeling error for the second option for Marine Area 10.7. I don't know, that's not that important. And then that we can add Marine Area 10 March as well for Marine Area 10 winter. And then that's the last of the things on this list I changed. But if we scroll back up and look at how that changes our overall counters, what that's done is it has only decreased our total Puget Sound sport catch by, I believe that's, 18 fish. That may be wrong. But what we've done is we've saved now over 13 total mortalities, and also reduced both of the other Still-Squamish metrics, although the first one very, very slightly. It's a matter of a fraction of a percent. And what we can do with these additional mortalities, while they're not on this tool, looking at some of the previous tools we had, this could give opportunities to potentially give an extra month to Marine Area 7 winter. It looks like that the Marine Area 7 winter February currently impacts about 4.2. So if, for instance, we were to close it, it would save us about 4.2 of those total mortalities. So I don't know the exact numbers, but I bet if we opened it in March, it would probably cost an additional 4.2 fish or so. And that we would have the fish to do that. And that sort of increases our days on the water. And, you know, while there are other options for what to do with these sort of, you know, mortalities we've freed up, you know, with like Marine Area 6 winter, Marine Area 8 winter, I think we should prioritize Marine Area 7 winter to give that area more days on the water, especially considering that would take away that August period. And just briefly, I know that does jump up the Nisqually number and also the Snohomish slightly, but I think that there's some ways that, you know, that can get around. Yeah. Any thoughts on that, or just welcome to just note it?
Well, yeah, and thanks, Zachary. I really appreciate your thoughtfulness there. That's exactly, you know, you doing what you just did was our intention with folks out there, that you had the tool, you could see what the different modeling scenarios do for potential seasons. So that's great. Appreciate your feedback on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And our next hand is Sandy. Sandy, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
We got you, Sandy. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate Dr. Dapp putting up that model. Now, when people scroll through that model, I could only see scenarios or impacts in marine areas. I didn't see any impact in freshwater, and I'm specifically concerned about Snohomish Chinook. So my first question is, why doesn't the model include impacts for freshwater fisheries?
If I could, Sandy, give me just 1 second. I'm resharing my screen. I actually saved Zach's suggestion. I saved a separate file for it. That's why I took it down for a second. Typically we don't include the freshwater in this tool, but today is a little bit different. If you actually scroll to the very end, Sandy, we do have kind of some changes down here for Snohomish freshwater. So we have kind of two different options down here. We have, as you know, currently we have in the model, we have in-river coho sport fishery as well as a game fish fishery. So I haven't included those as if we can put X's in these boxes to signify kind of potential reductions in either of those.
Yeah, well, my main concern would actually be a third category, just game fish only sport fishery, say on the North Fork, because on North Fork of the Distillery, you don't ever have any salmon fishery. So I could see a third game fish season on the North Fork only. And in fact, Mark knows that about a week and a half ago, Kurt Kramer and I sent him a letter where we proposed a couple of scenarios for game fish seasons on the North Fork that would have extremely limited impacts. In other words, we're talking about an impact of less than 1/10 of a fish. So I'd like to be able to, in this model, put in 1/10 of a fish, or maybe even, 500ths of a fish down there, and then see what that does to, the overall exploitation rate and how it may impact marine fisheries.
So if I could, Sandy, and recognizing that I don't have the scenario exactly modeled out in here, what I would say is if you had kind of a package of marine fisheries that you wanted to kind of trial out in the tool, and say then you had kind of some changes in the freshwater and you had ideas about what those reductions might look like, you could kind of just manually go up here and see kind of the post-action exploitation rate or mortalities, and you could kind of at the very least, in terms of mortalities, you could think about how that reduction might occur.
Yeah, I'd like to do that. So yeah, you're going to send a link to show how to get to this spreadsheet.
If there's not one already, I'll put one in chat in just a moment.
Thank you. And our next hand is from Luke. Luke, I have allowed you to unmute.
Yeah, hello. So I kind of have a Coho question and kind of maybe more technical. You guys post up a lot of information here with exploitation rates and whatnot, for north of Falcon, but also in you guys' publication website. It's not always explained where it comes from or what it means. So, for example, on the first north of Falcon, you guys published some summary of Coho exploitation rates by fishery. So I assume there's some kind of modeling done here, and it's not really explained where that comes from. And I guess in particular, I think, I know from me and from a lot of others, there's some frustration kind of with the mismatch of take, from us and the co-managers, in particular, for example, on the Snohomish wild population, for a population that's supposedly in rebuilding depressed mode. I think last year we had a forecast of about 60,000. I think the sport take, according to this similar, exploitation document, shows a sport fish around, 2,000 to 2,500. And then you look at the co-managers at about 12,000 to 15,000 fish, pushing that well below our threshold of 55,000 fish. And I think as a sport fisherman, I think I speak for a lot of us, we care about the resource. And if we're making a sacrifice and it really helps the resource, we're all for that. But for these stocks that are in low abundance, and it feels like it's very much a one-way street as far as who has to bear the brunt of restrictions. And, for example, with this Coho summary exploitation summary, it's published up, so it's from you guys, but we have no background of where those numbers come from, why those numbers that way, why is it lopsided? So just, I think it adds to the frustration a lot when we see our seasons dramatically shrinking, and we don't, often, if you look at the numbers, it doesn't really add up, or at least it doesn't, as a layperson. And I read a lot of this, and it's very consistent in some of these type of numbers, and I guess just some kind of explanation of that would be helpful.
So I'll take a shot at this one, Luke, and see if any of my colleagues want to jump in and save me at some point. So I think what I caught there was a particular frustration around Coho in and around like the Everett area, where we've had some really significant Coho closures since 2015, when we had, Kirsten talked about it earlier, we had our Coho crash. So you're absolutely correct. The state has really restricted its Coho opportunities specifically to try to get that Snohomish stock rebuilt. And you are absolutely right that in the recent past, there's been a catch or allocation imbalance when it comes to those Coho resources. But part of that is by choice for the state to try to do our part to help build the stock, and part of it's just by choice of the fishery choices we make between fishing pre-terminally and fishing terminally, and trying to balance all those opportunities amongst all our fishing groups. So I understand there's frustration. Sometimes those balances are, you particularly were noting the imbalance there for Snohomish. There's other stocks where state fisheries take much more of the exploitation rate or the allowable catch. So really this whole what we're trying to do here for fishing packages is just trying to achieve that balance amongst us and our co-managers. And I get some stocks are harvested at a higher level by the co-managers, and some are harvested at higher levels by us. It's just, that's where we try to find this balance between all of our fisheries all throughout Puget Sound.
Yeah, Mark, a little bit. If you look at the Snohomish, the Coho, right? We don't have this chart for Chinook, right? Or if there is, it's not readily available. I know for the Coho, if you go by river system, it's pretty consistent. It's pretty well in balance. And I think, for the most part, when we have good opportunity, if we don't catch our fish, that's one thing. But especially when a system like the Snohomish, which is driving a lot of restrictions, and as someone who doesn't want to see those rebounds, I care about the fish. It just kind of feels like some double speak when on one side, we're saying that we're here to protect the fish, and then there's people that are not, at least by appearance, not protecting the fish to the best of the, perhaps for what we all talk about here. And as someone who fishes primarily area 9 and 7, we've been hit with a lot of closures. Even area 9, again, with hatchery only coho, and I'm fine with that, right? Again, if we're all making a good effort to restore these stocks, but often in area 9, especially in September, especially the last few years, we've gone through 20 plus wild fish catch and release before we even, maybe catch one hatchery fish. And even that alone feels, and I feel bad about that, but we have these restrictions where, we live in a hatchery fish in area 9, and these very restrictive impacts. And then, I'm releasing all these fish, and half them, who knows what happens to them. And then on the other hand, on the Snohomish, it won't make escapement again for the 3rd year in a row because, it's these catch imbalances. So it's just one of those things where I think people see that, and it's kind of it's a trust issue. And I know everyone's working hard towards that, and it's a difficult situation, but those type of things just don't help the situation at all.
Thanks, Luke.
All right, thank you.
And next hand is Kurt. Kurt, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
Okay. A question on the Snohomish freshwater exploitations or impacts. I noticed that both two examples was 1.0 and 2.0. They're pretty even numbers. Every other thing in the models is down to the nearest hundredth of fish. It appears that you're rounding up to the nearest whole fish on the Freshwater Seasons. I'm just curious at sometime in the next few days to find out what the actual pre-rounding numbers were. It seems an inconsistent way to approach management to do something different in freshwater than we do every place else. And as you know, for 3 decades, we've struggled to find a couple hundred fish in different fisheries. And so I just want to, it'd be nice to use apples to apples type comparisons. The other question is, you have a escapement goal for the Snohomish wild coho at 55,000, which implies an exploitation rate of about a cap of about 14%. Is that a hard number?
No.
And so it just, if we can get there, great. If not, then, you can fish up to 40%.
So Kurt, I think you might remember this. The original escapement goal, I believe, was 50,000.
Mm-hmm.
And the co-managers agreed through this rebuilding period that we would elevate that escapement goal target while we were in rebuilding status, just to try to get us rebuilt that much faster. So I believe last year may have been the first year in a number where we actually had a preseason expectation above the 55,000, maybe one other year in the last 5 or 6. So I think, and last year was great. We exceeded what we thought was coming back. And, I think we did have some opportunity, at least while pinks were in there. So I think we're going to continue that approach until we see more consistent escapements above that 55,000 mark.
And I just want to make sure that people understood what, where our goals are. But it's hard to drive down the road until we know where we're headed.
So Kurt, and I'm going to go ahead.
I'm old enough to remember that, pre-2015, the typical Snohomish, the coho escapement goals were 150,000 fish. And I think I made a comment on the preseason forecast meeting about the unusually low marine survivals that were applied to the Snohomish fish. And, depending on what the source for that was, we may be fairly likely to see something better than 64,000 fish. Fingers crossed. Thank you.
So Kurt, and I'll just respond to the exploitation rate question there. So As you know, we've had really limited, if kind of non-existent, freshwater creoling in the recent past in the river. We've got some tools in our tool belt now. We've got some boots on the ground in the river where we're going to have fisheries open, and we're going to collect some data that helps us justify those modeling inputs. Those inputs round to one because that's what we could get agreement on to put in the model to prosecute these fisheries currently.
I expected probably as much. I would make one comment. The statement was that the 2022 season, game fish seasons would be similar to what it was in 2021, which was started September 16th. If the goal is with on water monitoring is to see what the Chinook encounters are, it might be helpful to do when there's actually fair numbers of Chinooks available. And I'm not so sure that September 16th fulfills that need. That's just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt.
And our next hand is from Robert. Robert, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I wanted to discuss a bubble fishery that I proposed down in the Minor Creek area from the Fox Island Bridge. We currently have spring Chinook that have been recovered on the White River that are being spawned at the Minor Creek hatchery. We've had a pretty good surplus above what's needed to have a fallback for the White River fish, which have been doing well. And I sent a letter to you, Mark, and to Chad Herring. I discussed it with Chad earlier. And I was hoping to see one unclipped fish in that area from Fox Island Bridge and from the point, the west point on Fox Island across to there's a let me see the head of it. I've got it right here to South Head on the Key Peninsula, which would allow us to fish that Carr Inlet area in June and July and harvest some of those fish that are currently being surplused. And I wanted you to just answer that. We're looking in the time when we're looking for more opportunity, we have hatchery fish that are basically not being used by sportsmen. And I was just wondering if there's any way we can get some benefit from that while everything else is dwindling.
Great comment, Rob. And we did have some initial discussion about it this right when your letter came in. Can't say that we got deep into that discussion, but it's an interesting proposal. I've been around long enough to remember when the Recreational Fisheries Enhancement Fund made a big run at marking those fish for a whole lot of years with little success. So I like the idea of a closer in bubble fishery. The other thing that we would probably have to do from our side, and not that it's a total deal breaker, is just think about how we would sample and monitor that one, just to make sure that we weren't getting out from too far in front of our skis. But interesting thought, definitely one that we'll put on the table and discuss.
Okay. I had one other comment. I have been talking with Aaron Bosworth quite a bit about the green, and I talked with Chad also about that. And I understand, looking at the exploitation rate of 15.9 and needing to get down in there on the Green River itself, that it's going to be difficult. But I just wanted to mention that there's been a lot of coho in the river, in the upper part of the river, that we don't get to fish on until they're really dark and not really worth keeping. And I wanted you to look and see if there is any way you could craft some additional fishing higher up in the river before it's currently opening. And that was my two comments that I had tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
I'm trying to offer things that will improve, that don't impact. I know you guys get bashed from all sides and you don't have an easy job, but I try to put things in that are reasonable and can actually provide more opportunity for sportsmen.
Appreciate that very much, Rob. Thank you.
And our next hand is from Alex. Alex, I've allowed you to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I want to look at the proposed season that was listed today. Kirsten, you had said that it was the same as last last week that was on our call. I have that pulled up right now. Both scenario 1 and 2 present a July opportunity for area 1, or excuse me, area 9. And then when we talked about a blackmouth opportunity, that was listed to be potentially in March at the mercy of a July opportunity in area 5. None of that is included in the proposal that was shared with us today. Is there any reason why you guys went that direction?
Do you want me to talk, Kirsten, or do you?
Yeah,
want to
I
take
was
it?
just, yeah, go ahead. I'll let you handle that one.
So Alex, I don't exactly know what proposal you're looking at, and I'm not sure that it matters at this point. The proposal that we have laid out on the table is the proposal that we put forward to date. We're here to take different ideas and proposals going forward for consideration. So I'm not sure how helpful it is to go back and try to see what we did a couple weeks ago.
Well, it's just helpful for us all to understand both scenario 1 and scenario 2 that we looked and went through together on the 16th. Again, in both those scenarios, there was July opportunity for area 9, and in today's proposal that we were provided today, there's not. So I think the question is what was the determining factor of us moving in that direction?
So
and I think that's pertinent.
Okay, sure. And I think the easiest answer to that question, Alex, is I believe there was no Area 7 winter opportunity that was proposed as part of those scenarios. And I think really what we were trying to do, there was several thought processes that went into this year's package, including all of the feedback that we've heard over the past year from last year's fishing seasons. But the thought process and that we discussed internally was to think about coho seasons and trying to hold those intact, and then trying to build impacts backwards in time so we could think about long periods of open opportunity without closure. And so I think that's how we were trying to approach the season, thinking about keeping the longest amount of time with the most opportunity and the most areas open.
Right.
And,
So
and also trying to balance that with, the current proposal has Area 7 in the winter. So, and that one's pretty expensive. So I think we were trying to balance that too, with that really strong desire that we've heard from Area 7 constituents to be there.
Sure. And in scenario 2, you did list an opportunity in March for Area 7 on scenario 2 here. It's just, it was going to cost Area 5 July opportunity.
Right.
So it was listed. So I'm just curious on why we switched that to March. What was there something that you maybe Derek played with there that found some more quota or reduced some exploitation rates? Did we gain a couple still Snohomish fish by going with February instead of March? I mean, I'm just trying to get some
so
sense.
Alex, sorry. So I think we heard in that meeting that was about 2 weeks ago, the public meeting. I think that we originally had proposed March, but I think the feedback we heard in that meeting from kind of several constituents speaking up was about how they valued that February opportunity, which is why we made the change in the season there from March to February.
And that was at the expense of the Area 9 July opportunity?
I think another thing that we heard from the constituents in that meeting was, as you pointed out, we looked at scenarios where we kind of moved around Area 5 and Area 6 to make some room there to have some of those winter fisheries. Area 7, as it's demonstrated in the tool, can be quite costly, particularly for Snohomish impacts. So shifting Area 9 was kind of one of those things that we looked at. And once again, we had described kind of in the meeting, as we were going through those scenarios, some of the ideas, particularly when we were talking about Area 7, kind of having Chinook fishing kind of around that coho time to kind of maximize season length and maybe get rid of some of our non-retention impacts that were in the modeling, some way to kind of maximize our catch there. And that's kind of what we were thinking about, I think, in terms of Area 9 as we looked at that.
Yeah, I think that's totally understandable. With us fishing in an August opener in both Area 9 and Area 7, what is considered on what our natural stock mortalities and our natural stock exploitation during that time of year versus where we might see a more abundance of hatchery fish in the July months.
So I did for today. If I could, Alex, it might be helpful to go into the modeling tool actually, because I did run kind of a number of scenarios today, both in terms of Marine Area 7 and Marine Area 9. If you give me just a second, maybe I'll put that on screen and we can kind of explore that a little bit. One thing that's particularly interesting for Area 9 is that those non-retention. So if you were to have that opportunity in the earlier period, say in recent years, it's been kind of mid-July through mid-August. And then you have Coho later in the season as non-retention for Chinook. Those non-retention impacts can be quite expensive, and I'll pull that up on screen so we can look at it here. Give me just one moment. So if I scroll down to the Marine Area 9 kind of summer scenarios down here, you can see kind of there's a few different ranges of options that I've put here. Starting with kind of the most extreme, which is no Chinook directed fishery, Coho directed only. In this one, I think it's a good gauge of kind of how expensive it is to be fishing for Chinook in Marine Area 9 in the summertime. And what you'll notice here is that if you look at our current proposal and then look at kind of an updated Coho directed only, this column right here that I'm going to highlight now, this represents kind of the cost of that total Chinook fishery. And now that gives us a good range as we consider kind of other options of how our Chinook fishery is modeled currently, how that equates to in kind of a total number of still Snohomish fish. So we looked at kind of a few different things here. First of all, we looked at kind of what it costs if we shift back to the start of July, build back in all the non-retention that it would cost in August and September, as well as folks in Area 9 know, that area can be one of the ones that is more prone to kind of closing early. So what we looked at was we also looked at kind of what quota we think might be necessary in order to have kind of that full fishing season, that full month time period. And what that would do is you can see that changes what the quota is modeled currently of around 6,000 fish. It changes that to almost 9,000 fish, a pretty big catch. And I've kind of gone back through and I've verified kind of against our recent year catches, looking at the last 10 years, 9,000 fish isn't outside of the realm of possibility in Marine Area 9 in the summertime period. Now, what you can also see is that if we were to put back in all that non-retention and pump up that quota to what we think it would need to be to get to that full season, you can see how that affects the still Snohomish mortalities. That brings it up by about 9 fish. And so let's theoretically, let's first of all maybe just check this box just to see how that might look. That's the only box that I've got checked right here. And we can see that it's quite costly. So with kind of some of the different options that we've been thinking about and considering, one option is maybe what we could do is we could model it exactly as we had it last year. So we put back in the non-retention in that August and September period. We bring back down the quota to what it was last year, 4,700. Once again, as a reminder, our quota currently is 6,002. And if we put an X in this box and say we do all that, have it exactly as it was last year, recognizing that 4,700 fish is probably going to result in early closure because once again, the amount that we think we'd need to run that season is around 9,000 fish. We can see that actually, even though it's a total quota decrease for how many fish could be caught in the modeling, it's actually an increase to the number of still Snohomish mortalities. I'm going to highlight with a new color over here in the blue. So you can see that costs 2 more still Snohomish mortalities to take that action. I think as we were looking at the different scenarios for Marine Area 9, we recognized that there was this opportunity to get rid of this very expensive non-retention piece, have a greater quota, and look at it. If we look at it in that way, that's kind of I think what we were thinking about as we were doing some of that modeling. If that makes sense, we have kind of a number of other potential scenarios built in here that we could explore and talk about if you're interested in. But hopefully that makes sense, kind of what we've been looking at, and kind of specifically in some of the scenarios that we've been considering as well.
Thank you, Alex. Our next hand is from Jason. Jason, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
I have, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so mine's got, you know what, I'm not into you guys' numbers, this and that, but I've been fishing Area 7 43 years. I have a 6-year-old boy now that's also fished Area 7 for 3 years. If we're so worried about Area 7's numbers, Area 9, so on and so forth, not that I want to see any more closures, why don't we cut this off at the source, hit the fish before they get in here? Number 2, stop the Indians from netting the damn rivers. 40 years I've watched these rivers get cut off at the source. And now us out here trying to feed our families are being cut off. What can we do to fix that? Hello?
Well, Jason, I would say there's nothing to fix because we support treaty fishing rights and we co-manage these resources with the tribes. We monitor those fisheries with the tribes. Jason, I'm not going to get into an argument about treaty fishing, okay? This is not about the tribal fisheries. This is about our fishing package. And I did mute you, and we're going to move on because we're not going to discuss whether or not the tribes have a right to fish in the rivers. They do. Thank you.
If I could, Mark, just one thing to add. I don't think I covered it as well as I did kind of in the meeting 2 weeks ago. Our target for Snohomish mortalities, it's 50-50 sharing with the tribes. So there is kind of, when we are looking at those total mortalities, there isn't a great imbalance there for Snohomish, which is our most constraining stock.
Thank you, Derek. Our next hand is Charles. Charles, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to have the opportunity to ask the source. Dr. Dapp, I'm trying to quantify the impacts that the early coho season in Marine Area 10 has on Chinook harvest. My concern is I'm a Seattle guy, and King County is kind of the major portion of the fishermen, which means we've got access to 9, 10, 11, and then of course we've got our brethren in Everett, that's 8, 1, 8, 2, and that's kind of the area where you've got the bulk of your fishermen. And it seems like maybe that Marine Area 10 coho season in the old sheet, the one that was active at 3 o'clock today when I logged in and downloaded it, had about 1,300 adult Chinook harvest cost. And I'm wondering, is that a real cost? And is that what that early coho season presents? Because, you know, dropping that season back to 1st of August, you've got bigger, fatter coho. They are going to be harvested, and maybe that June, July was something that might be something you should consider holding off on. But it's no longer in the model at all. It's not in the worksheet. So could you explain that?
Yeah, Charles, I can. And I really appreciate this question. I was actually looking at this earlier today, the number of encounters of Chinook during that early coho period. I'm going to confess something now that I also just noticed today, which is the reason that I was looking at it, which is as I was going through the modeling, I did notice that there was an error in the last set of model runs where I accidentally hadn't included that June piece for Marine Area 10. That was a mistake that I made, so I apologize for that. That's the bad news. The good news is that I have looked into it, and for most of our stocks of most of our key Chinook stocks of concern, I'm not really seeing kind of any type of sizable impact coming from that fishery. So I think to insert it back into the model should be hopefully pretty harmless in terms of impacts.
Okay.
As far as
you answered the question. Thank you.
Well, I did want to maybe just expand a little bit further, which is that that as I've been looking at it today, there has been a really there's kind of been a change of an effort, particularly in that June time period for coho. We've seen kind of over recent years that there's very different number of Chinook encounters from if you look back at 2016 versus if you look at kind of last year. So as I've been modeling it this year, I've been I have to give a shout out to one of our biologists, Ty Garber, who kind of provided me with a number of estimated Chinook encounters for that period that it was open last year. So we are using pretty what I hope is pretty good data for that.
Okay, yeah, it's just that I've noticed a number of people that during the coho season are using it to, head over to Kingston in an area that's not known for coho, or head over to the oil docks, again, an area not known for coho. And I'm not sure that it's really a tune-up for Chinook season, but I suspect maybe some of the impacts have been maybe hidden. But thank you for your time and your candor.
Thank you. And our next hand is from Arthur. Arthur, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
Hey, good evening, and thank you for allowing me to make a comment here. Last year's salmon season for the Snohomish terminal fishery went from August 1st to September 13th. We used to have it to where it was almost to the end of October. Last year's fisheries total at the hatchery was over 18,000 fish making it back to the hatchery, leaving 9,500 fish as surplus. 4,500 ended up dying in the hatchery without being spawned, which meant over 13,000 excess fish made it back to that hatchery. Is there any option to get a continuance if, say, X amount of fish are over what they were expecting to come back? And if that was the case, could it present the opportunity to continue till October 1st for the season?
So Arthur, I just want to make sure that I heard correctly. Your comment was for the Snohomish?
Correct. Yes, sir.
So what I may do, and I think I have Andrew on the line, is if Andrew wants to speak to that, or Edward.
Yeah, I think. Oh, Edward.
Yeah, I'll go first, Andrew, and then let you go with the finer detail. Just want to introduce myself. I'm Edward Eliezer. I'm the North Puget Sound Fish Program Manager.
Yep.
And your question about continuance, I'm not sure if I'm understanding you right, but are you asking like if we get a big overage like that where the forecast wasn't predicting that, like, do we get a credit? Is that your question, Arthur?
No, it's not a matter of a credit. It's a matter of extending the season, giving us a longer season. It closed on September 13th last year, and normally it's open till like the mid part of October. But again, it's something that has been cut to shorten the season. And I know that 8.2 million is the number of fish that they're trying to make it to the hatchery every year. And I think this is number 4 where they've made escapement and now have overages for surplus fish.
Yeah, we have some pretty big goals for increasing production for southern resident killer whales, and you're right, it's like over 8 million, and on top of that, we were doing some substantial upgrades to the infrastructure there. So last year we didn't have a weir in place the way it needs to be. It's completed now, and so we had an elevated a broodstock need. And you're right, a bunch of fish did come back. One of the problems that plagues us that we're looking into at Snohomish is we get a lot of 3-year-old males there. Correct. And so there's a big proportion of that, and just trying to make sure we hit those goals for southern resident killer whale production. So we've been talking with co-managers. We've lowered their broodstock need for this year. And there's a lot of stuff that we can do in season when we see a big push like that. But, last year was tricky because the fish were coming in and they're pretty beat up because of the infrastructure and, a lot of males. And so by the time we got all the females stripped out, there's just,
Sure.
the fishery is pretty much over. So it's a challenge. And so I'll let Andrew speak to what we're thinking about this season. So yeah.
And then let me ask one other question while I have
Sure.
you on here. 7,492 coho made it back through the hatchery this year. Is there any determination on whether we're actually going to ever see a coho fishery there on the Snohomish River?
I can answer that at a pretty high level, and Andrew could hit that too. We're working on getting better escapement methodology so we understand that population a little bit better. Same with Drayton Harbor tribs. We're really pleasantly surprised. We're seeing really healthy coho come into that system and greater abundances. And so a fishery is something that we definitely want to put on the table in the future, but our forecasts, we're not too comfortable with the methodology there. We want to do better. We know we can do better, and something that we're looking forward to in the near future. So Andrew, you wanted to discuss the Snohomish?
Yeah, I can start with the coho. We need about 9,000 fish to return to spawn to be able to have that's our escapement goal in there. So we're getting closer, but we got a little ways to go before we've got harvestable surplus in the Snohomish. In regards to the Snohomish Falls Chinook, Edward covered it pretty well. Right now, we do have it through 9/13, just like last year.
Gotcha.
And regarding the small males that Edward mentioned, we had about 8,500 of those out of that surplus group.
Wow.
Yeah, that's it's a little unnerving when all your rootstock's coming in as male.
Could the reason be that they're all being nailed at the mouth in the bay and all the smaller fish are going through?
We saw that. We've been seeing that elsewhere. There's been a lot of 3-year-old males showing up in the returns. We saw it in the Skagit and the Nooksack as well.
Okay, well, I appreciate everybody's honest answers, and thank you for the time.
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you. And our next hand is from Luke. Luke, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
Yeah, this is probably maybe more of a question for Derek. So if we modeled the Chinook season the same as last year, how many mortalities do we have? It kind of has like a baseline. And I think, because when I'm thinking, this is what I find when I fish the San Juans, especially in September, it's pretty much a wild fish, or maybe I should say, for at least from what I've heard, more of a unclipped Fraser hatchery composition up there. I know that I remember there was a discussion a couple years back, and if I remember it correctly, I could be wrong here, that especially during September up there, it is much more of a Fraser run. But I know kind of, in September, it's always kind of been the one last trophy fishing opportunity we have. Now, of course, this is a non-selective fishery, that we've had up until 2017 or 18. But so I don't know what the impacts would be if we kind of had the baseline as last year's fishery, but we had no fishery in July, but as a trade-off, maybe a trophy fishery in September. And if it is more targeting those Fraser stocks, and I don't know what our allowable is on those, but for me, and probably I know quite a few of the people would probably consider that if we have to make trade-offs, tough trade-offs, that might be one that's at least kind of a easier pill to swallow if you have kind of a more of our, I'll call it world class, but down here opportunities for some of these really nice Chinook up in the San. It was always in the San Juans in September, and so just I don't know, maybe it's something that could be looked at and considered.
Thank you, Luke. When I get the question of if you could model the fishery as it was last year, there's always a lot of nuance that goes into that. Whether we're using the same quota or the same season, or kind of some variation there. I would say that I've looked at kind of a few different options within the tool, and I might direct you there. There's one where we kind of look at if we were updating the quota in Marine Area 7 to be kind of the same as last year. how that might look in terms of impacts. And it is quite expensive, but I would encourage you to kind of go look at that option within the tool. We've also looked at kind of other options in there as well. As folks in Marine Area 7 know, we had a quota last year that we blew by pretty quickly. And then had exceeded within about a week of time. So another option that we did look at was kind of the same, maybe just looking at the July period from last year, but doubling the quota and seeing how that might look in terms of impact. So that's another option that we could explore. I haven't looked too closely at just having a September only fishery for Chinook. However, that's certainly an option that we can look at, and maybe I could have prepared when we get into the next meeting on Wednesday.
Yeah, Derek, because what I'm thinking is, obviously, with the quota being eat up so quick, that's because we have a lot of hatchery fish coming through at that time. In September, there's probably some straggling fish coming back to Bellingham Bay or the Snohomish, but it really is, right? I mean, at that point, it's largely, at least in my experience, largely unclipped fish. And, I've heard different things. I'm sure some of them are still coming back to our Puget Sound rivers. I've heard, and I believe from you guys at one point, that the majority of those are actually Fraser bound fish. And so I guess, as a possible, right, fisher would be, what I'm saying is no July, no August, but instead an unmarked fishery in September only, and kind of a trade-off. And and this would be, I would say this is not unheard of, right? We had these fisheries, just a few years ago, and so it's just something to look at, proposal.
Definitely we'll take a look at that one for you, Luke, and get back to you on that. I guess the one only other thing that I would say is as we look at that and we consider kind of fishing kind of in Marine Area 7 in September, the impacts on Fraser. The one thing we want to probably consider is southern resident killer whales, but we'll have that looked at, and we'll get that we'll get that in a proposal on Wednesday and looked at.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And our next hand is from Kurt. Kurt, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
Greetings. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, so I'm a Marine 7. The other gentleman was talking about 43 years. I've been fishing for 50. I'm not that good at it. I catch maybe 5, 6 a year. And last year was a disappointment. The season was going to be open for 3 months, and it was closed after, I think, 8 days. And I was just wondering, kind of why that happened. I can understand you have to close it for Chinook, but why wasn't it opened, later in the year for Coho? I just want to be out on the water. I don't, not being able to go out at all was just super frustrating. And it sounds like this year, from what I can tell, the current proposal looks like opening mid-August through September. Sounds fine. I just want to know, what we're doing to avoid what happened last year, and appreciate all the work you folks are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. I'll take a quick stab. We've mentioned this at several other meetings. Last year's wreck fishery outcome in Area 7 was unacceptable by any means. It was definitely not anything that anyone intended to happen. Essentially, we went so far past our quota, the department just wasn't comfortable reopening because of available Stillaguamish impacts and how far past we had gone with the quota. So putting that aside, I think we've thought a lot about opportunities for 7. We've taken some of them into consideration. I think there's others that folks have put on the table here in the recent past that we're going to model. This most recent proposal, as I mentioned earlier, was just us thinking about, trying to preserve as much season length as we could, knowing that fisheries closures impact everybody, and it's something we try to avoid. So we try to build in the most broad seasons as we can. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's maybe it's just so surprising that in 8 days that they could exceed the quota by so far that you would have to close it for 10 more weeks. It just I guess that's what happened. I don't know. So I guess maybe not opening until mid-August will solve that problem this year. Certainly hope so, because that was really frustrating last year.
Well, and Kurt, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And I agree, it was frustrating for us too. One of the things I
Sure.
think also that's on the table is, and it's been bantered about, is the potential of just doing short openers for Chinook, maybe later in July, and then having more of a coho season later on in August, as a way to kind of manage effort and kind of the limited impacts, but still provide opportunity during that that July period when we know there's a fair amount of Chinook around in the islands.
Yeah, well, for me, just I don't care which fish, as long as I can get out on the water. All right, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kurt.
And our next hand is John. John, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to participate in your get together tonight. One of the things that that I'd like to see Dr. Dapp and pursue within his research tables and stuff like that. What do we do with the pinniped population? There's been talk of this for many years now, and we're at a point where we're either going to end up with no fish and no pinnipeds because they aren't going to have anything to feed on anymore, or we're going to start recovering on salmon to the point where we'll have something as a resource out there. That's one item I think needs to be addressed.
So John, you're not alone. I know that there's been I guess I don't know how many different directions to take this, but there's been increased efforts on the department side to engage with the co-managers and the feds on marine mammal management in Puget Sound specifically. There's been increased efforts on the Columbia River in recent years to deal with some of that. I know the Washington Academy of Sciences recently did a seminar on marine mammal predation and salmon in Puget Sound. I think there's a follow-up coming on that here in the near future. So the problem that we run into is the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the ability for anybody to basically call those creatures or do any sort of management in that respect is really limited. But we do understand that there's an issue. We do have additional people and scientists that the agency has brought on board in the recent couple of years devoted to specifically understanding how large this problem is. So I know that doesn't bring you comfort because we've all seen it as we've been out on the water, the predation increasing for a long time. But it is something that we're at least trying to make attempts towards different ways of going about business in the future.
Okay, appreciate your response there. I had an interesting experience last week. The Department of Fisheries have been asking for public support in regard to adipose fin clipping. And I volunteered and went up to Wallace Falls for a couple of days this last week. I don't know how many public people are part of this meeting today, but you got to realize as a resource that we have, if we're going to have to do that so we can recognize our native and hatchery fish, that is work. I did 2,600 fish in 2 days with no experience, okay? And it was rewarding in one regard, knowing that I'm trying to help out our resource, but then, knowing that how many of these are going to be facing pinniped, deaths just from that happening. So, but as to the public people, I know that the fisheries was really after getting support from the public on doing this. Any idea how many volunteers or signups have gone to the hatcheries to help out with this clipping process?
Hey,
Sorry, got to remember the mute button. Leah, did you have something you wanted to jump in?
no, I was going to let you know that you were muted. You can take it away.
Thanks. So John, first of all, totally appreciate your help. Wallace is one of the hatcheries that's really important to us. And I know that Edward, especially as the regional program manager and the hatchery staff, really love and support anglers like yourself who are willing to come and help us out when we need it. So just really a big thank you for that. Yeah, I don't think we have the numbers on exactly how many volunteers we've had yet this year. We're still in the middle of that process and still haven't finished up all those projects for this year. The reason we were putting out the call is, as I'm sure others have experienced, there's a job market, a labor shortage out there for some of this work, and so the department's part of that as well. And the response has been pretty decent, and we really, again, appreciate all that help. So thank you.
Okay, thank you much.
And our next hand is from Ed. Ed, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity. I'll start by saying I'm greatly concerned about the reduced length of our seasons. That's, I think, sad for everyone. And I guess I have a question that relates to the relationship between coho salmon fishing and Chinook salmon fishing. And I was wondering if in places like Marine Area 9, we couldn't have shore fishing that goes on in, say, either July or even better, July and October. That's basically, not very productive and not gonna have much impact on Chinook salmon. Why can't we have longer seasons with more restrictive or alternative fishing methods during a longer part of the year as a way of helping to restrict impacts on these constraining stocks?
So Ed, really appreciate your suggestion. I think it is something that we could consider. Having caught a couple coho off the beach in Area 9 there at No Point, I'm familiar with how productive that fishery can be. I think we have, even in the recent past, since we've had coho crashes and closures, that we've actually tried to preserve some of those opportunities for shore fishermen. I do like the idea of essentially making the non-selective harvest off the shore, or the harvest off the shore non-selective. Not sure that we could get there this year, but I do appreciate the suggestion and something for us to consider. I think one of the hard parts for us is just assessing kind of that total effort piece. Since Area 9 is so big and there's more than one beach to access for coho fishing. I know it is something that we've done in the past where we've attempted to gain a better understanding of that effort and get some creel information off of that. So just really appreciate you bringing that forward and putting it on the table for us to think about.
Thank you. And our next hand is from Art. Art, I have allowed you to unmute.
Hello, everyone. Good to see everyone. Do you hear me?
We got you, Art. Welcome.
Okay. First of all, I know firsthand how hard you guys are working this time of year, and for that matter, year round. So appreciate it myself and a lot of people out there. Secondary, there was a gentleman by the name of Rob that brought up a bubble fishery, Marine Area 13 near Minner Creek, which is very interesting. like Mark said, Puget Sound Rec Enhancement Fund Oversight Committee has been trying to get a crack at those fish for a number of years. Very challenging, but I would see where enforcement might be kind of interesting there too. But hey, let's throw it against the wall. I think it's a good idea if we can make it work. Then I have a question. I noticed the Puyallup River and the Deschutes River Coho runs or the wild runs were down a bit there. I was curious as to what attributed to that, or do you guys have an idea?
So I have somewhat of an idea, but I see Gabe Madel's on the line too. He's a South Sound bio. So maybe I'll take a quick crack and hand it over to Gabe. I think what we've seen for particular some of these South Sound stocks is that when we have really decent or good ocean conditions off the coast, we often see the inverse of that in Puget Sound, especially in South Sound. So I hope I didn't get that wrong, and maybe I'll stop talking and hand it to Gabe before I say something stupid.
No, I don't think that was wrong, Mark. And I think specifically for the Puyallup, we had some real challenges in freshwater for the brood year that is returning this year. So specifically, we had pretty catastrophic flooding when those eggs and embryos were in the gravel. And, our forecast is based off of smolt trap data. So we're applying a marine survival rate to smolts that are enumerated at our smolt traps. And based on those smolt trap estimates, it just looked like that flooding, really led to just a overall reduced number of out emigrating juveniles, unfortunately. And that's really kind of what's driving that low forecast. And the Deschutes is a little bit different scenario, just from the standpoint that those populations have been a little depressed in recent years. We've had some just poor returns for a number of years that have contributed just, pretty limited production. So that's a little different than the Puyallup population in that, historically there wasn't a coho population in the Deschutes. It did well for a while, but in recent years, that population just hasn't been performing well.
Yeah, kind of what I thought. So thanks for that. Let's see, there was something else I was thinking of and it blew right out of my head. Well, that's good enough to start taking up your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Art.
Our next hand is from Bill. Bill, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the time and your efforts. I'm fished primarily Marine Area 11, probably 90% of the time, and sometimes Area 10. And I appreciate the looks like for Chinook, adding a few more months or time or opportunity for us to fish in Marine Area 11. A couple of questions. It's great that we have time on the calendar, but how does the quota for Area 11 this year look as compared to the last couple of years?
Bill, if I could have just a moment, I'll get back to your question in just a second.
Okay. Then while you're doing that, and Gabe, I'm sorry, Derek, I'm extremely impressed with the way you're able to manipulate those numbers. I'm a mathematician by trade, and I'm just impressed. While you're looking at that, a question or an observation. Last couple of years, the seasons are crafted very similar when looking at marine areas 9, 10, and 11. And when 9 and 10 are closed, as someone previously mentioned, they like to fish elsewhere. So that elsewhere is Marine Area 11. And when Marine Area 11 is open in June and July, when those other areas are closed, it chews up our quota really fast down here. And then when 9 and 10 open, then the population of fishing boats decreases. My concern is the same thing. When I look at this, Area 11 is open in June and part of July, while 9 and 10 are closed, and those fishermen are going to come down, and rightfully so. If I was them, I would do the same thing, I think, and then chew up the quota in 11. So I guess my comment is this, I know you're facing a lot of issues here, but it's not, it's just, I don't know about that. What else to say? You know where I'm going with this. So
Bill, I have those numbers that you'd requested. So this is for the season from June through September. And last year, that number was around 3,000 fish on the quota. And this year, currently in the modeling, looking at the middle ocean option, it's around 3,400. As you're probably well aware, kind of one of the key differences to consider there is that there's an additional half month of fishing in June. Usually June isn't quite as productive as some of those later months, but there is an increased quota there relative to what we saw last year.
okay, so yeah, I think you're correct, and I think the previous year we were at 4,200. I don't know if that's accurate, but my point is that those fishermen from other areas are going to move down to area 11 and fish June and July and eat up that quota very quickly. So that's really all I really have. And Derek, or maybe it was Gabe just a few minutes ago, mentioned the coho and the puyallup and the outgoing smolt traps. Has the outgoing smolt trap numbers gone up in the more recent years since that time?
Yeah, I can take that, Mark. Yeah, the last 2 years have been elevated relative to the brood year that we were talking about specifically, which was 2019. This year and last were both elevated from that brood year.
Excellent, great, thank you. I appreciate your time.
Yep.
Have a good evening.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. And our next hand is from Stanley. Stanley, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
Well, thank you. I have a question concerning the inner Elliott Bay fishery and how that affects your model. I don't see any boxes for that. And, there's consistently around 10,000 surplus fish or more coming back to the hatchery. Whether or not, I know last year they offered another weekend for Chinook fishery, but how does that go into your model?
That's a little bit of a strange fishery there, Stanley. And you'd kind of already identified why it's a little bit of a strange fishery. We currently have in the modeling, one weekend modeled, but what we've done kind of in recent years is we have an in-season update model as that run starts to come in. And in past years, when we've noticed that it seems like there's a strong return coming back to the Green River, we have opened up for additional weekends. I believe last year we were open for 3 for Chinook directed. I might be incorrect there, but I think that's right. I think that at least as the model's currently set up, it's planned to be kind of a similar structure, one weekend to start, but then potentially increasing more if that ISU model comes in favorably.
And then I guess in that fishery, because it is a unmarked fishery in inner Elliott Bay, how does that impact the wild fish survival or whatever?
We do take into account stock composition differences across areas, and particularly in that area 10E in Elliott Bay, there aren't too many. So the stocks that are of concern this year, we don't see Snohomish impacts in there. We see very limited, if any, Snohomish impacts in there. As far as kind of why that is in a non-selective fishery, just keeping in mind that I believe it's the Palmer Springs run on the Green River Chinook. I believe that those are mostly unclipped. So there is a fair amount of hatchery fish in there that are unclipped.
Yeah, it's about 1 million out of versus 5 million. But yeah, I understand that one. One more question as a modeler. What kind of correlation factor do you get out of your modeling? Do you go back and revalidate your model every year?
I do a lot of model revalidation at the end of each year, and I do it in all different types of ways, looking at kind of what was predicted as preseason catch versus postseason catch, or preseason forecasts for abundances versus what we actually saw. And maybe if you have something specific that you're interested in there, maybe send me and my team an email and we can get back to you on that one.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Stanley. And our next hand is from Robert. Robert, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
I appreciate some of the things Stan was just asking about, and I again appreciate the opportunity to speak. I wanted you to speak to how the juveniles in the test fisheries and the reporting of the juveniles affects, like our quota, because we've been shut down for the immature fish. And we know that the pinnipeds eat like 22,000 tons of fish a year. So a lot of those fish that we catch would have been eaten by a pinniped or something anyway. And I'm just wondering, how is that factored into the model? Because we're interested in adult fish. And I'm wondering if there's a ratio for what would have been eaten, or just if you could just speak to how that is factored in, because I've wondered about it and I don't know.
Yeah, so we do. So what I would say is we do have a natural mortality factor that goes into the model, and that varies by age. Younger fish are presumed to have kind of a higher natural mortality. What I would say there is that's definitely an area where there could be kind of more research, and I think kind of validating some of those numbers we have in there for natural mortality is one of the key things that my team's identified as maybe needing an update at some point. With that said, hold on one second, excuse me. Sorry, my daughter just got home. With that said, how we account for that in the modeling is we assign to each mortality, we assign what we call an adult equivalent value. And that adult equivalent value basically represents the likelihood if that fish wasn't harvested, or if that fish wasn't killed in some type of fishery activity, whether it's release or what have you, what the likelihood is that that fish makes it back to its river to spawn. And because of the way natural mortality works and because of maturation rates, it's much less likely that an age 2 fish, for example, will make it to spawning than say an age 5 fish. And so we do factor that in as we're doing our modeling. Actually, in terms of how we come up with our exploitation rate, that is specifically on the adult population, and therefore we're actually looking at specifically the adult equivalent mortalities as we're coming up with those metrics.
Okay, so you are taking some sort of ratio for those fish that would be would have a higher mortality. I'm just kind of curious what that rate was, and that you were doing that, because it seems like it wouldn't be apples and apples. So I'm glad to hear your model looks at that, and greatly appreciate it. The other thing that I'm interested in, and a number of the people from our Puget Sound Angler Club are interested in, is we have been interested in a fishery. We get to fit silvers in the Snohomish in the basin, and we encounter a lot of Chinook, and we have not been allowed a season inside of there. And it seems like a lot of the fish pass, and by the time we get the second or third weekend in Elliott Bay, the abundance of fish in Elliott Bay is not as significant. The tribes have netted, and a lot of those fish have passed through the bay. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for us, without impacting things negatively, to get an opportunity on those Chinook inside of the basin itself. And I know a lot of those fish have to get caught when the tribes go in for coho. And so I imagine they're included in an incidental catch at that point. But it seems like we as sport fishermen should get an opportunity on those coho where they're really nice. I mean, that's when they're good. We do get to fish above the Snohomish Basin, but there is an opportunity below that would be really nice to have an opportunity on.
Thanks, Robin. I'll just do a quick response there. I think one of the things that folks have been tuning in, the legislature was really kind to us earlier this year and provided us some resources for freshwater monitoring. So one of you're targeting in on one of the things that we're thinking about for the future is the ability to expand some of those freshwater fisheries, including the Green River. As you know, the whole idea around the turning basin is we know that fish hold in there for a fair amount of time before heading upriver. And a lot of that depends on water flow and other things. But as I think about our freshwater monitoring, getting into the basin, even if it's for short day openers, requires us to kind of expand that sampling and monitoring so we can make sure that we're capturing that. So I think you might have talked to Chad about this about Chinook, but I do think it's on our radar for future expansion in the river. Now that we're increasing our freshwater monitoring programs, we're looking at different opportunities in lots of different basins for having a different footprint into the future than we've had in the recent past.
Okay, I appreciate that. And if we could look at that, it's been something we've tried to get for a long time. And I appreciate that you're looking at it. Aaron Bosworth has been good. And Chad, we had a really good conversation. And I appreciate that you're considering it, Mark. Thank you very much. Yeah, whatever you can do, we appreciate it. And we appreciate the changes that we have gotten. And we'll keep pushing, I promise.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate your passion and your comments. Thanks.
And it looks like our next hand is from Darren Emmerich.
Hey, gang. Appreciate the time here. Good questions, great thoughts. Great respect for everybody. We're all trying to fight the good fight here and enjoy some time on the water. I've got a question in regards to some have touched on it a bit, but I'd like to expand on it, and that's in regards to sublegal encounters. And I'm curious if there's ever been consideration or thought on encounter percentages when using artificial lures / like minimum size lures versus larger or bait. And the reason I asked the question, obviously, is may that be something that could be considered? I know may not be popular. Maybe it's maybe it's something that a company's trolling so moochers can still do their mooching thing. But if there was, in my experience, when we're running smaller spoons, trying to, imitate sand lance and that sort of thing, that's where we are running into probably more sublegals or shakers. And I'm curious if that might be something that's either been thought about or is even worth being thought about.
Mark, you want me to take this one?
It's all you, Dr. Simonson.
So Darren, yes, thank you for that question. We have thought about that, and we've actually been in conjunction with the test fishers for both WDFW and the tribes. We've been conducting a gear study since about February of last year. So we've been collecting data on size of fish to detail, not just legal, sublegal, but actual total length for the Chinook that are being caught in the test fishery. As compared to gear. So we're looking at gear type. And so that's things like plugs and spoons and all the whole slew of things that are being used. And also looking at the size of the gear and the hook size. And we've kind of looked at both trolling and other fishing techniques as well that are used kind of throughout the sound with the test fishery. So mooching is included in that. I think there's a couple other techniques that are used specifically. I'm thinking about Area 11 has some specific techniques that are being used. So that's being considered as well. So we have been doing that. We have about a year of data. What we're planning on doing with those data right now, we have seen some trends that have popped out, and you are correct. There are definitely some size differences between different sizes of gear. And so what we're thinking about doing is kind of getting all that together at the end of this summer. And by then we'll have 2 full years of data. So we'll have 2 winter seasons and 2 summer seasons where we can kind of make it some of those bigger comparisons. I am seeing that there's differences in those trends between summer and winter, which might not be super, unexpected, because there's a lot more smaller fish that are in the sound in the winter fishery as compared to the summer fishery. So we're just trying to continue to collect data so we can kind of piece apart those differences that we're seeing. And then we're planning on getting a document together, at least a white paper together this fall when we have those 2 full years of data collected. And then it'll be something that'll be presented to Coho managers, and then we'll have it available for the public as well. So we're not prepared to make any major gear restrictions or anything like that on fisheries as of right now, but it is definitely something that we're considering moving forward. So, and I will say it won't be anything drastic. It would just be probably for trolling. But again, this is, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done here. So hopefully that answers your questions. And if you want more details on it, I'm happy to answer those via email or whatever else.
Yeah. And again, I mean, I'm looking for or searching for a solution to bridge the gap in years like this year, where we're contemplating or, had been contemplating potentially shutting down Area 9. And even the late start is, sucks for anybody that enjoys fishing that area. So yeah, I mean, I appreciate your candor and I will probably be reaching out to you. Thank you.
Sounds great.
Thank you. And our next hand is from Alex. Alex, I have allowed you to unmute.
Thank you. Probably Derek. So looking at the management goals for the Stillaguamish, unmarked at 9% SUS and marked at 14% SUS, with a non-treaty mortality in the ballpark of 65 to 70 fish. Did we meet those objective goals in the current proposed season?
We did not. So if you look at, if you kind of look at that tool that's available online, or there's also an exploitation rate summary online that you could look at, you can see that we're well above that 9 and that 14%. So how I came up with that 67 to 70 non-treaty mortalities available was I had done modeling exercises to look at what I would think that it would take us to get to a 9 and 14% on the unmarked and marked respectively. And then approximately looking at us having 50% of the mortalities, which is kind of how we've done management in recent years, is dividing those mortalities up. So, right. So that's what I've done there. If you're using the tool, I would recommend don't worry about trying to get to the 9% on the unmarked and 14% on the marked. Really kind of the objective that you want to be targeting there for Stillaguamish is that 67 to 70 mortalities. Okay, is there, firstly, so has this proposed season been presented to the co-managers? It's a jointly agreed model run. So it is. Yep. So we worked on it jointly with our co-managers. It does include co-manager fisheries in there as well for 2022, their first proposals. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next hand is Brandon. Brandon, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
You guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Perfect. Just want to talk about Area 9. Big Area 9 guy. So this is my first meeting I've attended. I guess maybe this question's directed towards Derek. As far as I understand, you guys, one of your proposals models, we're looking at August 1st with, I believe you said maybe a 6,000 fish quota. I guess to me, that's pretty lackluster at best. I think anybody that understands Area 9 knows that that could go the entire month and we won't get anywhere near close to 6,000 fish caught. In my opinion, there are already halfway through Area 9. What's it going to take to get that July 16th opener? What are we going to have to give up? What can you do in those models and spreadsheets and Excel sheets you were playing with to get that opened on July 16th?
So once again, I'd refer kind of back to the modeling tool, and there are a range of potential options there where it could be a July opener. I've looked at a few different scenarios there. As you've kind of correctly identified, it is more costly on Stillaguamish Chinook to move to that July opener. So what I would suggest, Brendan, is maybe play around with some scenarios in that modeling tool as to where we can make adjustments. And if, as you play with those scenarios and you settle on something that you think makes sense to you, if you could kind of forward on an email to myself and Mark and Kirsten with kind of your proposal and your logic behind it, we'll definitely take into consideration.
How do I get a hold of that?
So it should be, I put a link in chat earlier, but maybe I'll put another one in here in just a moment. It's available on our public meetings website. So that link should be appearing in chat in just a moment.
Okay, thank you. And looks like we might have a few more minutes for the last couple of hands. And our next hand is Tori. I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
Hi there, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hey, so I have a few questions about the Stillaguamish and the Skagit. I just got here, so I apologize if I'm already covering some of the stuff that's already been covered. But my question is for the Stilly, it looks like we're supposed to get an in-river coho season. And last year we were supposed to get that season, and it made it all the way to the co-manager meetings, and somehow it disappeared. I'm worried that that's going to happen again. What happened with that last year, and is that a possibility this year of losing that proposed season?
So I would say yes, Tori, anything's possible. It's there in the initial modeling proposal because, you know, we understand that both the game fish seasons and the salmon season opportunities are important. So they're both on the table to start the year. I think last year what it came down to was just kind of a choice that we make with a lot of fisheries at the end when we're trying to get to a final package is some fisheries can stay and some fisheries can't. And I think the overwhelming majority of respondents that we heard to the proposal were more in favor of a game fish season. Now, I think you heard some of the talk earlier where Sandy and Kurt were advocating for the game fish season. I think we're interested in having both fisheries. And as I said, we got some additional freshwater monitoring money and to get boots on the ground. I think we're also looking at maybe opening up different sections of the river at different times. We do that in other systems, just basically following the return in to try to avoid some of the fish that are already in the river. So again, I think it's possible. I think it's important enough that it's on the table and we're considering it, but I don't want to make any predictions as to where we're going to be at the end for this year.
Okay. Well, for what it's worth, I don't know how many. I feel like the Stillaguamish salmon fishermen are kind of underrepresented, but last year there was a lot of talk. You know, I met a lot of anglers on other rivers, and a lot of people were disappointed that we didn't get that fishery. So if there's anything we can do to assure that we get, you know, some kind of a salmon fishery on that river, that would be awesome. And then my other questions are on the Skagit and Cascade. So the last couple of years we've been having the tribal fishing during certain days of the week. What days of the week are they planning on fishing, and or is it both for the spring Chinook and the coho, or is it just for the coho?
So I'm probably going to look to Andrew or Edward if we've exchanged particular fishing schedules with the tribes yet. It may be a little early in the process about whether or not that's happened. So I don't know if we have particular closing days in our hands just yet.
Hey, Mark, that's correct. We don't have dates yet or days yet.
Okay. Well, last year we got an extra weekday, but we lost a weekend day. And if we could get, you know, Saturday and Sunday, that would be preferable, because what happened last year was everybody was condensed on Saturday. You still had the same amount of people as you would on Saturday and Sunday, but they were all in that one day, and it made the river super crowded. So if we could get that other weekend day or weekend day. And then as far as the hatchery, last year there was a closure on the gate where it was closed before it was closed after legal fishing time. Like during spring Chinook, we were only allowed to go in until after 5. Is that still going to be a thing? Because I know it was a problem where we were having to park on the road at the Marble Mount Hatchery. Or if we could get that, you know, open an hour earlier so we could take advantage of being able to get there on that early morning bite. Because for like the spring Chinook, we missed probably an hour of the bite, and we weren't able to get there till the sun was already up.
Edward, can you take that one?
Sure. That gate issue is quite a problem last year, and partly the reason for that was our hatcheries were closed due to COVID. So this year our facilities are open now, and so we don't really have the need for the gate. We have some other kind of security issues there at Marble Mount, but we're working through that challenge and want to make sure we have access so you guys can go fishing. So thanks for the question.
Okay. I really appreciate that. And okay, I got one more thing on for the Coho. It looks like it's supposed to close on October 31st for the Skagit system. Why is that not open into November? It used to be open till November 30th. And last year there were some extensions, but the last couple of years we've been getting 20,000 plus hatchery Coho back to that hatchery, which is more than double what we used to get. Why are our seasons being cut so short now the last couple of years?
I can take that in. We've been catching a lot of wild Coho, and we need to watch our wild Coho take in the Skagit system. By the time you're to late October, the hatchery Coho are all upriver, which is why the Cascade has been staying open a little bit later. So what our plan is for this coming season is to assess things at the end of October. We've got a creel going on up there now, so we'll be able to estimate the number of fish that were caught up through that date, make sure that we've got plenty of wild fish remaining, make sure we're okay on Chinook, and then we can just extend it like we've done in the past.
Okay, cool. And then once the tribe gets their allotted quota, are you guys planning on opening it 7 days a week like last year after that quota is taken?
Oh yeah. I stay in pretty close contact with the bios up there, and as soon as they're done, they'll let us know and we can open it right back up.
All right, I appreciate it. That's everything. Thank you guys.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. And it looks like Kurt has his hand up next. Kurt, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
Yeah, just a quick question for Derek. When we talk about a target goal of 65 to 70 Snohomish encounters, is that just the non-treaty fishery or the co-managers fishery and combined?
That's just the non-treaty fishery. Combined, I expect that it'll be 67 to 70 for both the non-treaty and 67 to 70 for the treaty at the end of the process.
I just want to make sure that everyone understood what we're shooting for. Thank you.
Okay, and our last hand is from Chad. Chad, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, my question is 8182 haven't opened in years for winter blackmouth. What are we doing to maybe possibly get an opening back up there? It seems like 7 had more encounters with Snohomish fish than 8182 did. And yet I'm seeing a winter blackmouth season proposal for them.
Well, to be quite honest, Chad, a lot of winter area opportunity has been cut in the recent past, primarily because we do have reduced impacts available on a number of stocks, including Snohomish. I would think, if I'm being honest with you and the folks on this call right now, I don't think that would be the first place where we would look to return opportunity, given that it's right on the front door of those rivers that and those stocks that we're trying to protect the most.
Right. I understand that. It's hard to, the numbers show that the San Juans have more impact than 8182. And yet you guys are thinking about doing an opening up there. It just doesn't sit right with the guys from 8182 that have been shut out. We don't get a summer Chinook fishery. All these other areas do. That's our one opportunity, and it's been taken. So that was my only thing. I wish you guys would put a little more effort into trying to get some opportunity up that way.
Thanks, Chad.
Yep.
And it looks sorry, there was just a weird feedback issue happening. Our next, we have another hand up from Paul. Paul, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to speak.
I know this is a little bit of a touchy subject, and just to be upfront, I'm very supportive of the equity between the tribes and the rest of us anglers out there. That being said, we place quite a bit of emphasis on selective fisheries as a tool to manage morbidity of wild stock. Going back to the very touchy subject of netting, as we all know, by its very nature, is non-selective. Is there any talk, with co-managers about maybe switching to other ways of harvesting those salmon that would allow more of a selective fishery on both sides of the aisle, so to speak?
Thank you, Paul, for the question, and also thank you for acknowledging the sensitivity of the issue. I think there are examples of tribal fisheries where they do use alternative gear. They're not widespread throughout Puget Sound, but maybe just for a quick example, the Lummi tribe fishes with tangle nets for spring Chinook in the Nooksack River. And so there's an example where they do essentially they use tangle nets. They have fishers on board or samplers with wands. They basically detect the fish that might have a coated wire tag in as a hatchery unclipped fish, and they'll harvest that, but let the wild fish go. So it gets into this kind of thought or idea of, we don't tell you how to fish, you don't tell us how to fish, kind of thing. But those conversations do happen. I would say it's not an avenue that the state necessarily strongly pushes on with the tribes. I think they acknowledge that there's lots of different ways to get your impacts, and we kind of leave the choices up to them as to how they would like to use and exercise their treaty fishing rights.
Okay, thank you very much for that. One last comment / question, perhaps. I think, as we all know, the salmon that originate in the rivers of Puget Sound and ocean rivers around here travel quite far, and it seems that to have effective management, we need to have a very, very aggressive and strong coalition up and down the West Coast, including Canada and Alaska, and just really get everybody dialed in on the same page. We've got everything from boats up in the Bering Sea, scraping salmon along, and everybody else, all the way down to California. And I'm just wondering, what can we do to rope NOAA and work with the federal government, like people have mentioned before, pinniped reduction, which is a whole West Coast issue. This is not just something that's just in Puget Sound. It needs to be addressed, as a whole coast. And I'm wondering, what can WDFW do to be more aggressive in working together up and down the coast to really help these salmon populations come back? Because I do not feel that very localized efforts are going to be sufficient.
Thanks for that, Paul. And I guess I would argue that the cooperative efforts up and down the coast are probably stronger now than they've ever been. There's great amounts of real-time information sharing throughout the season about catches. Modelers can then take those catches and kind of translate them into potential impacts. We do have the Pacific Salmon Treaty that's been in place since the early 80s, mid 80s. That was just renegotiated in the recent past, I think, and started in 2019, runs all the way through 2028, I believe. But there were significant reductions to northern fisheries, and also based on abundances from, kind of, and Derek can speak better to this than I can, but there were reductions that were made as part of that renegotiation of the salmon treaty, where those more northern fisheries are held more accountable to their impacts on the southern stocks. Even the Stillaguamish stock has been capped as well. So I think I also am aware of this because I happen to have the privilege of representing Washington on the Fraser River panel that works with Canada to manage the sockeye pink fisheries in the U.S. waters as well. So I would have to say, from my perspective, there is quite a bit of cooperation. There's often quite a bit of scientific back and forth amongst our scientists and managers in discussing the impacts of management decisions, marine mammal predation, other types of predation, southern resident killer whale efforts as well, is something that is cooperatively managed through the Salish Sea as well. So just a few examples. I appreciate that. But I do think that we are not only trying to act locally. I think the co-managers are really committed to what we can do here in the southern U.S. waters, but I think there's broader efforts beyond just what the co-managers do to address some of the things that you spoke about.
Okay, appreciate that, and I'm assuming that those those agreements that you mentioned do also include the impact from trawlers up in Alaska and the bycatch issues up there. I think, as we know, it seems like the bycatch is more than all our quota down here combined in a lot of ways. So it seems to me like there's, I don't know, do you feel like that they are doing enough, or more needs to be done up there on that end?
Well, as a Washington fisherman myself, I always feel like they should be letting more fish come back down here. But I also understand there's the realities is we're always trying to achieve balancing between all the fisheries to provide opportunities coastwide.
Yes.
So.
Well, appreciate that. Thanks for letting me speak.
And I think Mark did an excellent job of summarizing kind of our contributions to the Pacific Salmon Treaty and what's going on in the north. But if folks are interested, I did link that treaty here in the chat. And if you're interested specifically in Chinook, it's within the Chapter 3 section.
Sorry, Leah. I was going to call on Alex.
No, it's okay. Alex, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you again. Derek, there's 24 total options within the tool. Now, I understand that you're not going to select them all, or there's only certain scenarios that actually make sense, but have you found a scenario in that tool that meets management objectives yet? Or are we tasked with maybe finding a scenario that you guys may not yet have explored?
Well, as we're going into the modeling and planning process, as folks know, there's almost an infinite number of possible scenarios, and kind of the smattering of different options that I've put down there represents some of the ones that I or the department or that constituents had brought to us, some of the things that we've been thinking about. I think that I've looked at that tool in many different ways and come out with many different scenarios that could get us in that range of 67 to 70 Stillaguamish objectives. But a big part of these meetings here is trying to get feedback from you all, and I think it's been really helpful to look at some of the scenarios in this meeting today.
Okay, so we have seen some scenarios that do meet those management objectives. I would understand at least one of them that would definitely meet it, which would be not beneficial for anybody. Okay, but this is the one that we found that was the closest that we could get, that has the most potential to maybe be agreed upon when we get to negotiations.
Sorry, I was distracted and missed the question. I
So-
apologize.
Well, the question mark was, is this the one season that we came up with using the tool that has the highest probability, it's closest to our management objectives and has the highest probability of being welcomed within negotiations with the co-managers?
Do you mean, Alex, kind of what we've currently proposed in the current set of fisheries that are proposed right now?
Correct.
In the current set of fisheries proposed right now, just keeping in mind that we're not meeting quite where we need to be on the Snohomish mortalities, I think that it reflects kind of what we've heard in some of the public feedback, particularly in kind of the meeting 2 weeks ago, and something that we think we could bring forward and might have a good chance of getting there. But once again, keeping in mind that we need a little bit more reduction from where we're at currently. Mark, is there anything you'd like to add?
So what I would say, Alex, is the proposal that we put forward to the tribes, what's on the table, was just that. It's a first proposal. And we obviously got a reaction from that proposal from both our constituents and our co-managers. So I would imagine that the next proposal is going to look different than this proposal on both sides. So just so everybody knows, and I'm kind of teeing it up, and I think we're getting towards the end of the meeting here, is we do have a co-manager meeting tomorrow with the co-manager policy folks. I don't know where we'll be tomorrow. If I'm being honest, I don't know that we're going to be in a much different place when we have a Wednesday public meeting. We might do additional modeling tomorrow, but I don't know if that's actually going to happen. So we may be kind of back here talking it through some of this same stuff, but I think our goal here is to get to a preferred package. We also don't want to go into a meeting tomorrow and put a bunch of fishery changes on the table without the tribes also considering fishery changes within their own package. So there is some strategy and kind of forward thinking about timing and when we put proposed changes on the table. So,
okay, so I'll just try to make this really quick. So we're not likely to see much changes by Wednesday. That would make sense. Today's Monday night. So the next, as we look at the slide here, there is not another public North of Falcon meeting scheduled before you guys go into the PFMC meetings that are, I believe they're not public. Are they public or are they not public?
So the meetings themselves are virtual. They are open to the public and online. We will have, so they're not open to the public in person.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I didn't know if they were private, even in means of Zoom meetings. So
no, and also, Alex, just let me do my elevator pitch here for that whole week, from the 7th through the 13th and all through the weekend. We're going to be having daily phone calls open to everybody that's on this call tonight and anybody else who wants to listen in to talk about the current fisheries proposal that's on the table. And hear from folks about what they like and don't like, and then take that into consideration as we move forward through PFMC week and try to get to, a singular final ocean option that matches up with a final package for, the Columbia River and Puget Sound.
Okay.
So I would encourage you to, tune into that week.
Definitely.
We're going to be doing daily stuff. We're going to try to keep the website updated with the most recent information as we go through that week.
Lastly, and hopefully maybe you can touch on this as well, Mark, can you shed some light on the details of what I've heard as the quota buyback program?
Quota buyback program?
I thought that it was discussed in a meeting on the 16th in regards to.
Are you talking about the conservation payback as part of the harvest management plan?
Yes.
So that was part of our agreement that was submitted to NOAA Fisheries that essentially puts a conservation payback program program is not the word I want to use, but that's what came out right now. Puts a conservation payback provision in place for all fisheries, both tribal fisheries and non-tribal fisheries, on their overall Stillaguamish impacts from year to year. So essentially what we'll be doing, and the details of this are not finalized, but the impetus is that after each fishing year on or about November, December, when we have all our final season catches compiled, maybe even into early January, we'll do some analysis and modeling and try to determine where our overall fisheries impacts were for the previous year. And then we'll look at that in terms of what that means for the next year going into north of Falcon. If we take all of our fisheries and wrap them up into a ball and we've exceeded those impacts on Stillaguamish, then we'll have to do some sort of payback that matches that exceedance, right? I think that was the intent of that provision as we put it in place.
And is that works both with us and co-managers?
That is for both tribal and non-tribal fisheries.
Thank you. And our last hand is Tori. Tori, you can unmute yourself.
Hey, so I have one quick thing on the Skagit. So for a spring Chinook up there, we have a lot of unclipped hatchery fish up there. Is there any way that we could maybe retain some of those? I know it makes things complicated because they may be wild, they may be unclipped hatchery, but at least maybe some of the jacks, because we have a bonus jack limit on that river, and there in this state there's other rivers that are marked selective but do allow you to retain unclipped jacks. Is that a possible thing going forward?
You got this one, Andrew.
There we go. That'd be tough. Quite frankly, one of the things we're dealing with up there is the wild population that's upstream from the hatchery happens to be the one that's struggling the most. It's called the Upper Cascade Wild Springs. And last year we had 145 make it back to spawn. And I mean, jacks count. And so any fish that comes out in a fishery isn't going to go up there, and that could pinch us if we're not careful. I like the idea. I'd like to be able to find a way to say yes, but I think we'd have problems.
Is there a plan to get those numbers up? Because I noticed a lot of the fish in the tanks up there are obviously unclipped hatcheries, and then also for like the coho, when they take their wand and they check to see if it's got the tag or not, a lot of those are coming up as hatchery fish. Maybe we just need to get more volunteers. Or is it intentional to meet escapement? Why is the numbers so low for the mark rate?
Oh, yeah. So what you got going on up there? You've got a coho and a spring Chinook indicator program. Is what it's called. And what that means is we release equal numbers of both clipped and unclipped in one that are coded wire tagged. And that way you can take a look at survival and use that survival information to make assumptions about your natural origin fish that experienced all those same fisheries. Does that make sense? And so it's a study is what it is. So it's the same amount of unmarked as adipose that are coded wire tagged.
Yeah, I know they've done other things like that, like on the Columbia and the Snake River steelhead heading up into Idaho. How long is that experiment going to go on for? Is this like long term, or is this only short term?
Yeah, it's all we've got to make some kind of assessment of harvest on our wild Skagit populations. So it's a surrogate for them.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the input.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I want to take a moment to really appreciate Kirsten and Derek for all their efforts in putting the presentation and all the meeting materials tonight. And I really want to take a minute to appreciate everybody who's still with us tonight. We went an extra half hour from kind of our planned time together, but well worth it. I think we got lots of good questions answered and took lots of good feedback from you folks about proposals on the table. I think Kirsten mentioned it earlier. There's Coho modeling that happened tonight. So we'll make sure to get our website updated tomorrow with the most recent Coho modeling updates. Hope to see as many people as can join us on Wednesday morning for a public meeting. We'll have some further discussion about proposals, probably run through some more scenarios that we received today as part of the comment, and try to center in on a preferred package going forward from folks that are attending that meeting. We'll also, again, keep the website updated as much as we can, as quickly as we can. You have our contact info. If you have some more bright ideas, feel free to ship them our way as we get farther down into this process. We'd be happy to consider them. So thanks again, everybody, for being here. Hope you can join us in the future. And good night. We'll talk to you soon.